Hello, I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Part 1 of our MAHG Arkansas Fort Smith virtual tour. The MAHG Arkansas series was created to increase appreciation of Arkansas's unique mid-century modern architecture. Tonight we will be featuring the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple in Fort Smith. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, MAHG Architecture, as well as Propak Corporation and Arvest Bank for their generous support of this program. The United Hebrew Congregation Temple was designed in 1956 by Fort Smith architect E. Chester Nelson. After suffering fire damage in 1970, the temple was restored with the help of Nelson's nephew, architect Bob Laser. In addition to its architectural significance, the temple is home to one of the last remaining Jewish congregations in Arkansas. During the video premiere, Mason Toms, Callie Williams, and I will be monitoring the comments, so please feel free to ask questions and give us feedback on the tour. To learn more about Preserve Arkansas, please visit our website at preservearkansas.org and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Sometimes the most interesting places are located in areas that you would never think to look. This is certainly the case with the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Constructed in 1956 and designed by local architect E. Chester Nelson, this remarkable international-style Jewish house of worship sits at the end of a dead-end street in a fairly ordinary post-World War II neighborhood. Due to its location, this hidden architectural gem is the type of place that you would have to know about in order to find it. However, despite the building's obscure location, the congregation has a long and prominent history in the area. The story of the United Hebrew Congregation began in 1880, when a Bavarian immigrant named Simon Joel founded the Temple of Israel congregation in Fort Smith. Though the city had a history of Jewish residents since 1842, it was not until after the Civil War that the area had enough Jewish residents to warrant a congregation. The significant economic boom that the frontier town saw during the Reconstruction era attracted many newcomers, including several Jewish families. Joel was able to bring several of these families together to create a new Jewish congregation. When the Temple of Israel congregation first held services, they met in a commercial storefront space in downtown Fort Smith. Additionally, the First Christian Church of Fort Smith, located at 222 North 7th Street, was kind enough to allow them to hold confirmation services at their building. However, in 1886, Jewish community leaders from both the Temple of Israel and another Jewish congregation in the area came together with the help of Rabbi Messing from St. Louis, Missouri, to establish a new United Hebrew congregation. Like the Temple of Israel, the new United Hebrew congregation followed the ideology of Reformed Judaism, as opposed to Orthodox Judaism. Reform Judaism, also called Progressive or Liberal Judaism, had its beginnings in 1810 when Rabbi Abraham Geiger, a prominent Jewish scholar, established the first Reformed temple in Seesen, Germany. Geiger had been exploring ways in which the Jewish population of Europe could live Jewishly in modern society. Some of his proposed changes included the use of local languages instead of Hebrew for prayer, mixed gender seating within the temple, one-day observations of festivals, and the use of a cantor and choir during services. His ideas quickly spread throughout Europe, and it even made it to the United States by 1841, when the first Reformed congregation was founded in Charleston, South Carolina. From there, the ideology spread across the country. Land at the southeast corner of the intersection of North 11th Street and North E Street was purchased and prepared to be the location of a new temple. In 1892, the cornerstone for a beautiful Romanesque revival structure was laid. The new structure was constructed of red Fort Smith brick and had carved granite accents. Many prominent citizens of Fort Smith attended the dedication ceremony for the new temple, including Fort Smith's infamous hanging judge Isaac Parker. However, by 1908, the congregation was in need of more space, so an addition was constructed on the rear of the temple. The new space included 4 classrooms for the expanding Sunday school program, as well as increased social spaces. Also in 1892, the Progress Club was founded by the congregation. Its expressed mission was the promotion of Jewish social culture, good fellowship, and the mental development of its members. In October 1911, the Progress Club began construction on a stately building near the temple on North 6th Street. When it was completed the following year, it allowed the congregation to expand its social outreach and created a place for many local Jewish businessmen to have their offices. The United Hebrew congregation thrived in the following decades, eventually expanding to offer numerous religious and secular activities for the people of Fort Smith, both Jewish and non-Jewish alike. In the 1930s, the United Hebrew congregation absorbed the Orthodox Jewish congregation of B'nai Israel, which had been founded in 1913. Many of the former members of B'nai Israel went on to play active and significant roles in the United Hebrew congregation. However, by the early 1950s, the congregation was in desperate need of more space. Additionally, many of their members had moved to the newly developed eastern areas of the city. In order to consolidate their many activities under one roof in a place that was more convenient for the members of the congregation, the decision was made to construct a new temple on a large plot of land on North 47th Street. When the United Hebrew congregation was considering how their new temple should be designed, they turned to the notable Fort Smith architect E. Chester Nelson. Nelson was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota on July 26, 1894, to parents Carl O. and Bessie Patterson Nelson. Carl Nelson was a Swedish immigrant who came to the United States in 1887, becoming a citizen a year later. In 1895, the Nelson family moved to Birmingham, Alabama, where Carl and Bessie would spend the rest of their lives. A young Chester Nelson decided to stay relatively near his parents for college and attended architecture school at the Alabama Polytechnic Institute, now Auburn University, where he graduated in 1915. While he was still in school, he began working in the offices of Miller and Martin in Birmingham, where he stayed until 1916. This was followed by a year in the offices of notable Alabama architect Frederick Osfeld. However, his time with the firm was cut short when he was drafted into the United States Army in 1917, where he eventually rose to the rank of corporal. After the conclusion of World War I, Nelson returned to Montgomery, Alabama to resume his duties in the offices of Osfeld. A few months after Nelson's return from the war, he received a letter from an old college friend named Joseph J. Harrelson. Harrelson had written Nelson to try to convince him to move to Fort Smith, Arkansas to start a new firm. Harrelson's previous employer, Alonzo Klingsing-Smith, was retiring and looking to sell his practice. Nelson accepted Harrelson's offer, and in November 1919, the firm of Harrelson and Nelson was born. Over the following 26 years, the firm created several notable works in western Arkansas, including the 1919 Classical Revival 9th Street Baptist Church in Fort Smith, the 1927 Art Deco Fort Smith Masonic Temple, the 1928 Italian Renaissance Revival-style Logan County Courthouse in Boonville, the 1931 Gothic Revival Dodson Avenue Methodist Church in Fort Smith, the 1935 Beaux-Arts-style Johnson County Courthouse in Clarksville, and the 1935 Beaux-Arts-style Vol Walker Hall on the campus of the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Despite the success of the firm, Harrelson and Nelson was dissolved in late 1935. Harrelson went on to partner with Ralph Mott to create the firm of Harrelson and Mott, which eventually became Mott, Mobley, Horseman, and Staton. Chester Nelson went on to create a small private practice under his own name. During this time, Nelson continued to create remarkable works of architecture in the area. Among these were the 1935 Art Deco Sebastian County Courthouse in Fort Smith, the 1939 Art Deco Madison County Courthouse in Huntsville, the 1946 modern-style Grand Avenue Baptist Church in Fort Smith, and the 1953 International-style Sparks Memorial Hospital in Fort Smith. In 1950, James G. Cheney, Jr., a graduate of Nelson's alma mater, Alabama Polytechnic Institute, joined Nelson in his office as a draftsman and project manager. This was followed by the addition of Nelson's nephew, Robert Laser, in 1955. Laser was a member of the first class to complete the newly created architecture program at the University of Arkansas in 1950, alongside Fay Jones, Ernie Jacks, Joseph Wilkinson, and Woody Knight. In 1957, Nelson changed the name of the firm to E. Chester Nelson and Associates, in recognition of the significant work that was produced by Laser and Cheney. This was followed by a subsequent name change in 1962 to Nelson, Laser, and Cheney. The firm maintained this name until Nelson's death on April 9, 1970. Over the following years, the firm changed names several more times and is still in operation today under the name Studio 6 Architects. During the mid-century period, the Nelson firm created several remarkable and significant examples of modernist design in the region. In addition to the works previously mentioned, they also created the designs for a 1956 Church of Christ building in Ozark, the 1962 Monroe Shoe Factory in Clarksville, the 1968 Springdale Memorial Hospital in Springdale, the 1969 Sebastian County Courthouse in Greenwood, and of course, the 1956 United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple in Fort Smith. The design of the United Hebrew Congregation Temple is an example of the international style of architecture, which rose in popularity in the United States in the early to mid-1930s. The name was created and the style first defined when Philip Johnson and Henry Russell Hitchcock created an exhibition in 1932 at the Museum of Modern Art, which featured photos and drawings of, quote, modern buildings from 15 countries, including the United States, which exemplified the movement. The exhibition was an effort to raise awareness and increase popularity of the new modern forms of architecture. A book of the same title was published in late 1932 and further elaborated on the concepts and ethos of the exhibition. The term international style was derived from the idea that a modern architecture should not take inspiration from any historic or culturally specific styles or forms of architecture. Instead, it should embrace the function of each structure and celebrate it. It should also exhibit and employ the latest in building technology. Because of this, a truly modern structure could be built anywhere in the world and still perfectly serve its purpose, hence being called international. However, the international style would embrace any localized stylistic variations that were born out of pragmatic requirements necessitated by local climate or geography. In this way, the international style was not a set of architectural rules and stylistic motifs like the popular revivalist styles of the time, but rather it was a collection of architectural ideas that embraced contemporary materials and construction practices and placed the needs of the occupants at the forefront of the design requirements. Because of this, examples of international style architecture feature a wide variety of forms, materials, and typologies. The international style was typified by buildings composed of simple geometric forms, typically in an asymmetrical arrangement. As the United Hebrew Congregation Temple has a simple, blocky composition with an L-shaped plan that is made up of 3 distinct parts, it clearly conforms to this quality of the style. Each of these parts contains specific functions, and the importance of these functions are clearly demonstrated on the exterior. The tallest section of the building contains the sanctuary and social hall, the most important spaces in the building. The lower section on the north side of the sanctuary was devoted to education and contained the community room, library, and rabbi's office, as well as a series of classrooms. This wing ranked second in the hierarchy of the interior spaces and was the outreach or public engagement area of the building. As such, it was placed on the street side of the structure, denoting its importance and its function as the connector between the community and the congregation. The lower section on the south side of the building was for contemplation and contained a large covered porch that originally overlooked a meditation garden and the facility's kitchen. Though it represented a vital part of the congregation's ideology, this section had a tertiary level of importance in the overall spatial hierarchy of the structure. As such, it was placed on the south side of the building, which also allowed it more privacy and enclosure. The way in which Nelson created an exterior that represented the internal functions of the structure was also a common feature of the international style. Best expressed in the famous quote, "Form ever follows function," by famed American architect Louis Sullivan, this idea was one of the original guiding principles of the international style in Europe. International style buildings also tended to have flat roofs with shallow or non-existent eaves, except in the cases where a cantilevered section was needed to create sunshade or rain coverage, or where the roof plane was extended to create a porch. This is clearly seen on the temple, where the only eaves that appear are over the banks of windows on the east and west sides of the education wing or over the entrances. Additionally, buildings in the international style often had smooth and continuous exterior surfaces. While this was most often done with concrete, stone, or stucco, brick and vertical wood siding were also common. Aside from the sections of smooth stone on the west and north sides of the sanctuary section that easily conform to the established norm for the style, the primary exterior of the building seems to have been an odd choice for the style. The main veneer material on the temple is what is called clinker brick, which are bricks that became deformed in some way during the firing and hardening process of being made. They take on many different forms and colors depending on the composition of the individual bricks. Their use as decorative elements on buildings commonly appeared in the United States starting in the late 1920s. Additionally, they were a somewhat common element found in the exterior design of synagogues. However, the irregular surface texture that they give a building would seem to be at odds with the established ideals of the international style. It is thought that Nelson's idea behind their inclusion in the design of the United Hebrew Congregation Temple is that even though they may be flawed, they can still come together to make something beautiful. In this way, they are representative of people who have their individual faults, but together can create so many wonderful things. Because of this, the clinker bricks move beyond the realm of architectural enclosure and become a more symbolic and crucial representation of the congregation's ethos, just as important as the satin-finished aluminum menorah on the west side of the building. Another common feature of the international style were the windows. The windows on the east and west sides of the classroom wing, while not exactly ribbon windows, do present the idea of them. Similarly, the large sections of colored glass on the north and south sides of the sanctuary sections give the impression of glass curtain walls, as does the aluminum storefront style entrance on the west side. Perhaps the most well-known feature of the international style is the absence of applied ornament. This is also often the most misunderstood aspect of modern architecture. In contrast to the idea that an international style building should have no ornament of any kind, it was meant to be understood as no ornament for ornament's sake. However, necessary elements to the design of a building can have an ornamental aspect to them, so long as they are functional and do not distract from the overall architecture of the building. On the exterior of the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple, this is best seen in the stylized form of the aluminum menorah on the west elevation of the building, which complements and enhances the facade but does not distract or detract from it. Likewise, the aluminum lettering on the north elevation of the building, which reads, quote, "Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God, United Hebrew Congregation," embodies the guiding principles of the temple. As such, it moves beyond decoration into a crucial statement of faith, much like the menorah. On the interior, Nelson used other methods that combined function and stylistic flair to create spaces that were more than mere rooms. In the sanctuary space, Nelson designed an accent element that draws visitors' eyes to the most important feature in the room, the ark, located on the center of the west wall. This streamlined mass that rises from the floor and wraps up onto the ceiling contains more than just the most sacred part of the structure. It also contains cove lighting and the air conditioning systems for the room. Additionally, this element accents and complements the Philippine mahogany paneling that covers the remainder of the west wall and creates a screen that conceals the choir and organist. This wood paneling is not only beautiful to look at, but also adds to the acoustic value of the space. As a final touch, Nelson flanked the space with large sections of art glass. Though stained glass is a bit of a given in worship spaces, in modernist designs, the traditional realistic depictions were replaced with panels of various colors with solid panes. This was done to not only create a kaleidoscope of dancing colors that give an otherworldly atmosphere to the space, but also to ensure the focus of the space was the ark, not the pretty pictures in the windows. A final feature of the interior that is worth noting is the folding screen between the sanctuary and social hall. Though this element and arrangement may seem rather commonplace to the many of us who grew up in mid-century houses of worship, few realize that it was first seen in mid-century Jewish architecture. The folding screen not only allowed for a greater seating capacity for high holy day services, but it also allowed for a more direct and visual connection between religion and community. The idea of the social hall serving as an extension of the sanctuary space has a long history in Jewish architecture. However, a fully physical manifestation of the idea didn't start to appear in Jewish architecture until the early 1940s. Since the post-World War II period saw a dramatic increase in the construction of houses of worship, both Jewish and Christian alike, the same architects that were designing the Jewish temples were also designing the Christian churches. The spatial flexibility that these folding screens allowed was an ideal fit for the new generation of worship spaces for both faiths, as the sanctuary and social fellowship halls served a variety of functions in the mid-century house of worship. While in Christian church design, it was usually intended to be a temporary measure until a larger sanctuary space could be constructed, it was always a central architectural tenet in the Jewish design. The new United Hebrew Congregation Temple was completed in April 1956. An official dedication ceremony was held on April 29th of that year. It was led by Rabbi Albert Friedlander and assisted by the temple president Louis Cohen and vice president Ernest Mendelsohn. The new building had cost around $100,000 to build, more than $942,000 in today's money, and occupied about 7,000 square feet of land. Shortly after the congregation moved into their new building on North 47th Street, they sold their former temple on North 11th Street to the First Lutheran Church, which occupied the same block. Sadly, the beautiful structure was demolished in the 1970s in order to provide more space for future expansions by the Lutheran Church. However, the entry archway, with its granite columns, decorative coins, and triangular pediment, were salvaged and put into storage by Julia Yadon. In recent years, it was installed as the entryway to the West End Park in downtown Fort Smith, where it still stands today. The marvelous international-style temple was instantly hailed as a beauty of modern design by a celebrated architect. It served the congregation well for the following 14 years until it was severely damaged in an electrical fire that occurred one night in 1970. Luckily, most of the structure was unharmed, but some of the building was in need of significant repairs. The congregation turned to Nelson's nephew, Robert Laser, to assist in the repair work. Laser was very familiar with the design, as Nelson had created it shortly after Laser had started working in his office. Under the careful eye and guiding hand of Laser, the building was thoughtfully and carefully restored to its former glory. During the nearly 2 years that it took to repair the temple, the congregation met at the First United Methodist Church in Fort Smith. As one congregation member would later point out, the Fort Smith community was always helpful whenever something bad happened to the temple. Though the congregation of the United Hebrew Congregation Temple enjoyed a long span of time when it had a large number of families in attendance, in the 1970s, economic hardships in the area led many families to move to other areas in search of better occupational opportunities. Today, the congregation has about 50 members, but they are very devoted to the temple and the community. Though they are a small community, they are very proud of their remarkable 140-year history and stunning international-style building. There are still regular services at the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple, making it one of only a handful of still active Jewish congregations in the state of Arkansas. Interestingly, 4 of the 6 remaining congregations are housed in mid-century modern structures. In all 4 cases, the thoughtful modernist design of the temples still resonates with ideals of the congregations and continue to meet the spatial needs of the worshipers. This is certainly the case with the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple in Fort Smith. In recognition of the remarkable history of the congregation and the beauty of the international style design, the United Hebrew Congregation Tillis Memorial Temple is scheduled to be nominated to the National Register of Historic Places in December 2020. It is hoped that this nomination will bring a much-deserved awareness and appreciation to this hidden architectural gem, especially since it is one of the oldest continuously existing congregations in the city.